two kinds of audio environments. One is unplanned, random, sometimes maddening. The other is planned and under control of human beings. The latter is music, the shaped sound between silences. The better the shape, the more pleasing the sound. This chapter urges us not to limit ourselves to only one kind of music when such a rich variety of music exists, from Bach to the Beatles, and beyond. This chapter separates music into its component elements. Then it describes some of music's major forms, together with suggested works from different times and cultures. One of the basic elements of music is the tone, or note, a sound produced by the human voice or an instrument that maintains a given frequency of vibration. Another basic element of music is the scale, a sequence of tones or frequencies from high to low. At first, both Western and non-Western scales were comprised of 5 tones. This is called pentatonic scale. The Western scale now has 7 tones and is called the diatonic scale. The 7 tones of Western music were given the letter designations C, D, E, F, G, A, B. These letters are known as musical notes. Any of the 7 notes can begin a scale. The key in which a piece of music was composed is identified by the first note of the scale used in the piece. Keys can be major, using whole tones, or minor, combining whole and half tones. Much non-Western music is based on a 5-tone scale, and these 5 tones are separated from each other by wider frequency intervals than Western 7-tone scale. This explains why non-Western music may sound strange to Western ears, used to narrower frequency intervals. Traditional African music did not have a fixed scale at all. Instead, its patterns varied according to the mood of the musician or singer. This variability paved the way for both jazz and blues music. Rhythm is a very early instinct, and its use might have preceded formal music. This chapter compares our enjoyment of rhythm and rhythmic movement to our Dionysian side, the pleasure in expressing our feelings spontaneously. Rhythm is defined as an alteration between stress and unstress, which the chapter compares to the patterns of poetry. Some modern composers attempt music that is totally arrhythmic, or irregular and unpredictable, to create a mood of agitation and instability. In non-Western cultures, melody is usually a sequence of tones working as a unit and played or sung more than once. If a work is a long sequence of tones in which a given unit is never repeated, in some modern opera, some listeners complain that it has no melody. But all music has melody, whether a given unit of tones is repeated or not. This means some music requires closer listening. Harmony is the simultaneous production of tones by voices or instruments. Not all music has harmony. Harmony abounded in the secular music of the Renaissance as composers experimented with varieties of musical instruments and vocal patterns. The invention of harmony made possible an explosion of musical styles and genres, such as opera and the symphony. Silence makes music possible. To appreciate music, we must appreciate silence. Many great works make powerful use of silence. For example, the Funeral March of Beethoven's Third Symphony, in which silence represents a withheld expression of grief. A way that we can detect a musician's feeling for the music is to listen to how the performer manipulates the silences that surround tones. We will talk about these issues, these discussion points in class on Wednesday. The variety of musical experience. Bach's music introduces theme and variation into music, influencing the improvisations of later jazz composers and performers. Bach's music is full of tension between the restrictions of form and the need for liberation. Technically, the era in which Bach lived and composed was called Baroque. The later classical era features Beethoven, who reinvented the music of the West, expanding the range of the symphony, choral works, and chamber music as vehicles by which the passions are communicated. His composition, Eroica, brought an unprecedented unity to the traditional four movements. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is both unified and written on an even grander scale than Eroica. The birth of songs, art songs, may be traceable to the singing of such works as the Iliad, all the way back in ancient Greek times. By the time of Mozart, Beethoven, and Schubert, the song as a form had become a respectable component of the concert repertoire. It could be created in a relatively short span of time for singers who needed material, and it was a way of earning money. The classic songs of the great composers are referred to as art songs, and Schubert is considered a master of the genre. Folk songs endure for the group solidarity it engenders. During the 1960s, the United States saw an intense revival of folk music, influenced strongly by the unpopular war and the need it served to help American youth ward off feelings of alienation and isolation. This chapter treats these categories of folk songs: commemorative, work, accumulation, scoundrel, and narrative. Bob Dylan was a major folk singer of the period. The spiritual has its beginnings in the need of African Americans to express and preserve their heritage, give meaning to their sufferings, and assert their rights. Spirituals emphasize God's concern for the individual, however downtrodden by human persecution. Once mainly belonging to the African American community, spirituals became the basis for gospel music as a genre. Mahalia Jackson is one of the best-known gospel singers. Ragtime emerged in the early years of the 20th century from African American musicals, and these traditions influenced by European styles. Originally, ragtime tunes heard by Scott Joplin were probably variations on old plantation songs and lively banjo melodies played on riverboats by small combinations of instruments and players. Jazz was born when African American musicians went to New Orleans to study European genres, combining them with songs of the fields and the rhythmic songs of slaves as they rode. From ragtime, jazz musicians borrowed syncopation, and from Bach, improvisation. Syncopation is defined as when the melodic line of a piece of music is placed with the non-accented beats of the rhythmic accompaniment. Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong, and Charlie Parker, among other notables, were known to improvise on a stated theme for 10 to 15 minutes at a time. Duke Ellington was a pioneer in putting together and crafting jazz compositions. He brought jazz to Carnegie Hall. George Gershwin, another notable jazz composer, carried jazz to the concert stages of the world after the rousing success of his famous Rhapsody in Blue. Today, jazz is played in intimate clubs throughout the world as well as concert halls. Wynton Marsalis, classically trained at Juilliard, straddles both worlds successfully. He is also the first jazz composer to win a Pulitzer Prize for music. The blues originated in the music sung by slaves after a hard day in the fields as an outlet for depression. Then it was taken over by the jazz industry, which saw in the five-tone scale and the blue note a means of expressing sadness. Most blues songs deal with the tragedy of love. Bessie Smith was one of the leading blues singers, famous for singing lines like, "If it wasn't for bad luck, I wouldn't have no luck at all." Many popular songs that flourished in the 1930s and 40s, the so-called big band era, have become American music classics. Frank Sinatra was a great stylist of popular songs. And this chapter focuses on his big hit, "One for My Baby," as an example of the genre. As you can see, the next topic we have takes us into the mid-20th century and now into the 21st century with the introduction, the birth of rock and roll, from Elvis to the Beatles and beyond. Hip-hop we'll talk about, as well as rap and other non-Western and avant-garde forms of music. So continue reading the chapter, and we'll talk about those and other forms and give a listen to a few types of music and styles in class on Wednesday. Thanks for listening.